that Bruce and I have much of the same issues with respect to the Scriptures. Once you're in them, and you're up here talking about them, I don't ever want to stop. And so sometimes I go a little long, and for that I ask your pardon. But I want to tell you,
we ain't got a hot date, don't worry about it.
There is nothing more better to invest in than the enjoyment of this book. So please turn to 1 Samuel chapter 30. Let's remember our situation where we're at. The sin of Saul, his hatred of David, has caused great confusion in the land of Israel. You cannot stand before a mind that is bent upon evil and murder. And Saul is bent upon such things, and it is destroying his kingdom. Even David, his best commander and his most loyal commander, even David has turned into error and folly and every kind of mistake. What's he done? He said, I don't have any kind of life in my own land. I have to go to the land of my enemies and live among my enemies. Do you understand what kind of stresses it takes for somebody to do that? And on top of it, David's picking up all kinds of bad habits because he ingratiates himself with the king of Gath. Now, who had he killed earlier in his career? Goliath of Gath. And now here he is, buddying up with Achish, the king of Gath. Now, it gets worse, because Achish is off doing his kingly duties for his people. And what's David doing? David's going to little small pockets in Philistine territory, and he's massacring settlements. And he knows that as long as he kills every single person and no one is left alive to tell on him, he knows that he can get away with it. This is not wholesome. This is not godly. This is what the evil of Saul has led to. And this is what evil leads to. Evil breeds evil, even in the hearts of God's people. And that's why in a land where we have embraced perversions, where we have embraced things that we know displease God, we even see Christians who engage in it. Now we're in chapter 30, and I'm sure, like me, you've seen a problem here. David's serving in the army of the Philistines. Who are the army of the Philistines going to be attacking? They're going to be attacking the people of Israel. And so you see David's on a collision course to fight against his own people. So this is coming. Now, the Philistine army commanders find out about Achish's new captain and say,
Achish, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't need a traitor.
I don't think we need this guy coming with us when we attack Israel. Why? There's a great chance he's going to betray. And you can look all through antiquity, and you can see where these kinds of betrayals have happened. This is not a new thing. It's not an isolated thing. And so Achish in chapter 29 calls David over and says, look, you've been faithful to me. He even swears by the living God. Do you get this? This is the black king swearing by God to the good David about David's faithfulness to the black king after David has been going and massacring the black king's servants. Does this get a little bit confusing? Here's my point. Saul's sin. You throw a rock into the waters, everything is disturbed. You know, every part of the water reacts to this. Now, what's the saving grace in all of this? Well, from a human point of view, there is no saving grace. David, the man of God, is compromised. The forces of evil are ascending. The people of God are being forsaken and are forsaking God. And this is the natural course of history. Everywhere you go, you will find this pattern over and over again. But the scriptures teach this is not the end. And that even as the world system itself runs down, and even as God's people both perverts God's goodness and is a victim of the perversion in the land, God himself has taken it upon himself to be a force, a governing force in this land. So what's happened in chapter 29? Well, something providential has happened. The Philistines have come together. We're going to destroy Israel. And so we better not have their best captain right next to us in our ranks when that goes down. So send him away. King Achish sends David away. David says, "What have I done?" Well, and here's the weird thing. What has he done? He's been wicked. Nevertheless, David is sent away. And I want to tell you now, this is all a setup because Saul has been running amok in Israel for these years, these times, these seasons. Saul has been the king. Now, when the Lord rejected Saul, what could he have done? Saul could have renounced his kingship. He could have given up his power. He could have said, "Lord, I have sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be the king of your peoples. How shall we proceed?" And then the Lord could have turned that to great good. So what you see is, Saul has done the exact opposite. He's riding it into the ground. He's taking every last ounce of it that he can. And he's been able to so aggressively do this that he's pushed away his best captain. He's killed the priests of the Lord. He's threatened his own son and daughter for harboring David. You know, this is the state of human government unless God is in a thing. You know, and I don't mean to be political, and I don't mean to call out specific members of government in our day today. So I'm not going to name any names. And I don't want people to partisanly think, because people are going to want to say, "Oh, it's this party, oh, it's that party." My friends, I want to tell you, if you're in government, you are scum. Politics is dirty. And unless God is with you, and unless God is in the thing, it's a dirty game. And the people who succeed in politics succeed because of the dirt. They are masters of dirt. Now, I'm not looking to get myself killed here either. I'm just saying that this is how it is in government, unless God intervenes. Now, so Saul has had these years where he has rode God's nation. He has ridden the land into the ground. He has profaned it. He has usurped an authority that God no longer wants him to have. And no one has been able to stand before him. And now finally, there will be an accounting. But first, what's the one issue here? What's the one thing that could happen in this whole situation? Well, David's a wild card, isn't he? If the Philistines come over and they are going to destroy the people of Israel, and David finds out, what's he going to do? Everything in his power to save his people. And so God has a little side route, a little side detour for David during this time. Let's look in chapter 30. David and his men got up early in the morning and headed back toward Philistia, while the Philistines left for Jezreel. So the Philistines are going off to fight Israel. David is being sent back to his home in Philistia. Now in verse 1, it took David and his men 3 days to reach Ziklag. Now that's the town where they were living in exile in the Philistine territory. But while they had been away, the Amalekites had been raiding in the desert around them. They had attacked Ziklag, burned it to the ground, and had taken away the women and children. When David and his men came to Ziklag, they saw the burned out ruins and learned that their families had been taken captive. They started crying and kept it up until they were too weak to cry anymore. David's 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, had been taken captive with everyone else. David was desperate. His soldiers were so upset over what happened to their sons and daughters, they were thinking about stoning David to death. But he felt the Lord God giving him strength. And he said to the priest, Abiathar, let's ask God what to do. Friends, when utter calamity has come upon you, when utter ruin is right on your doorstep, when your whole life has fallen apart, and you're hopeless, and you've been defeated, and there's nothing to do, there's always one more thing the child of God can do. He can say, let's ask God what to do. So Abiathar brought everything he needed to get answers from God, and he went over to David. Then David asked the Lord, should I go after the people who raided our town? Can I catch up with them? Go after them, the Lord answered. You will catch up with them, and you will rescue your families. David led his 600 men to Besor Gorge, but 200 of them were too tired to go across. So they stayed behind while David and the other 400 men crossed the gorge. Some of David's men found an Egyptian out in a field and took him to David. They gave the Egyptian some bread and he ate it. They gave him a drink of water, some dried figs, 2 handfuls of raisins. This was the first time in 3 days he had tasted food or water. Now he felt much better. Who is your master? David asked, and where do you come from? I'm from Egypt, the young man answered. I'm the servant of an Amalekite, but he left me here 3 days ago because I was sick. We had attacked some towns in the desert where the Cherethites live, in the area that belongs to Judah, and in the desert where the Caleb clan lives. Oh, and we also burned down Ziklag. Will you take me to those Amalekites? David asked. Yes, I will, if you promise, with God as a witness, that you won't kill me or hand me over to my master. He led David to the Amalekites. They were eating and drinking everywhere, celebrating because of what they had taken from Philistia and Judah. David attacked just before sunrise the next day and fought until sunset. 400 Amalekites rode away on camels, but they were the only ones who escaped. David rescued his 2 wives, and everyone else the Amalekites had taken from Ziklag. No one was missing, young or old, sons or daughters. David brought back everything that had been stolen, including their livestock. David also took the sheep and cattle that the Amalekites had with them, but he kept these separate from the others. Everyone agreed that these would be David's reward. On the way back, David went to the 200 men he had left at Besor Gorge because they had been too tired to keep up with him. They came toward David, and his people were with him. When David was close enough, he greeted the 200 men and asked how they were doing. Some of David's men were good-for-nothings, and they said, "Those men didn't go with us to the battles, so they don't get any of the things we took back from the Amalekites. Let them take their wives and children and go." But David said, "My friends, don't be so greedy with what the Lord has given us. The Lord protected us and gave us victory over the people who attacked. Who would pay attention to you anyway? Soldiers who stay behind to guard the camp get as much as those who go into battle." David made this a law for Israel, and it has been the same ever since. David went back to Ziklag with everything they had taken from the Amalekites. Some of these things as gifts he sent to his friends who were leaders of Judah, and he took them and said, "We took these things from the Lord's enemies. Please accept them as a gift." Where is David's heart? He's in a foreign land, but it's still with his people. This is a list of the towns where David sent gifts: Bethel, Ramoth in the southern desert, Jatir, Aroer, Siphmoth, Eshtemoa, Rachel, the towns belonging to the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, Hormah, Borashan, Athak, and Hebron. He also sent gifts to some of the other towns where he and his men had traveled. Why did this happen at this time and in this way? I want to submit to all of you that if David had known of what we're going to read about in these next few verses, he would have sacrificed himself and his entire cohort of men to try to save his people from what's coming next. Meanwhile, the Philistines were fighting Israel at Mount Gilboa. Israel's soldiers ran from the Philistines, and many of them were killed. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting was fierce around Saul, and he was badly wounded with enemy arrows. Saul told the soldier who carried his weapons, "Kill me with your sword. I don't want those worthless Philistines to torture me and make fun." But the soldier was afraid to kill him. Saul took out his own sword and struck the blade into his stomach and fell on it. When the soldier knew that Saul was dead, he killed himself in the same way. Saul was dead. His 3 sons were dead. And the soldier who carried his weapons was dead. They and all of his soldiers died on that same day. The Israelites on the other side of Jezreel Valley and on the other side of the Jordan learned that Saul and his sons were dead. They saw that the Israelite army had run away. So they ran away too, and the Philistines moved into the towns the Israelites had left behind. What is this? Complete, devastating, utter defeat. The day after the battle, when the Philistines returned to the battlefield to take the weapons of the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons lying dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines cut off Saul's head and pulled off his armor. They put his armor in the temple of the goddess Astarte, and they nailed his body to the city wall of Beth Shan. They also sent messengers everywhere in Philistia to spread the good news in the temples of their idols and among their people. The people who had lived in Jabesh and Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul's body. So one night, some brave men from Jabesh went to Beth Shan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons, then brought them back to Jabesh and burned them. They buried the bones under a small tree in Jabesh, and for 7 days they went without eating to show their sorrow. What do we see here, friends? Even in the midst of perversity, even in the midst of tragedy and calamity, even in the midst of cowardice and running away, there are still heroes. And so it is. You can't ever give up and say, I'm overwhelmed. There is no good left. I'm the last of the good in this world. For it is not true. The world you live in is bigger than you understand it to be. It is more complicated than you are able to recognize. It is more evil than you could possibly understand. And yet, there is also a remnant of good. And so we are at a low point here as we end this book, 1 Samuel. We're at a low point for the nation. But I want to tell you this. Saul had put the nation on this path when he had rebelled against God. And I can't tell you just how harmful it is to have evil among your kin. Why is it so hard for our land, these United States of America, in these days in which we live in today? Why is it so hard? Why is evil so strong, good so impotent and weak? Well, one of the reasons why is because, unlike most, not all, most of the previous conflicts, there was an enemy outside of this land that we could focus our aggression against. But today, the evil lives within. The evil is our friends. The evil is our family members. The evil are those in our town and in our nation who've turned away from a good and godly heritage to pursue the most wicked of evils. How many King Sauls do we have running around in government now? Friends, we have many. And an external enemy is always easier to deal with than when it's your own brother, when it's your own relatives, when it's your neighbor. But guess what? That was 1 Samuel. We've got 2 Samuel to look forward to, because God's not done with this land and with this nation. And if evil ebbs and flows, good also will ebb and flow. And it is very dark in this land, but we're about to find out that God has a purpose and an intention for the land of Israel. Its greatest kings lie just ahead. And so, what can we do, brothers, in the face of such evil? We can run to God. If this recognition doesn't make you a praying person, I don't know what will. Because that is our refuge. God Himself is our refuge. We must run to Him, or we will be gobbled up by our own relatives, by our own friends, by our own neighbors, in our own land. It breaks my heart to know that, what is the current polling? A third of young people think of the Constitution as a document that, we could do better. It's just a dumb piece of paper. I'm sure we could do better. What wickedness. And also, what naivete. We are not aware of our own doom. Saul, Philistines, people of Israel, the Amalekites. This is the human story. And unless God were in this story, it would be a vile story. But God is in this story. So let's bless Him and worship Him. Let's give to Him what the Scriptures teach we should. Praise and honor, songs and thanksgiving. May the God of peace, may the God of all wholesomeness, may the God who loved us enough to send His own Son to be our Messiah, may that God be with you this week. May He be with you in your reading of the Scriptures. May He be with you in your work. May He be with you in your leisure.